Think cowboys were just tough guys with guns and horses? They were actually survival geniuses who could thrive in the deadliest terrain on Earth using nothing but their wits. No GPS, no first aid kits, no camping stores, just raw knowledge that kept them alive when everything else failed. Ready to learn skills that make modern survival gear look like expensive toys? Let's ride into the real Wild West. When a cowboy got thrown from his horse and broke his arm 20 miles from the nearest town, he didn't have the luxury of calling for help. He had to become his own doctor using whatever nature provided. And surprisingly, these frontier medics had pretty good success rates. For deep cuts, cowboys would pack wounds with spider webs. Sounds disgusting, but spider silk is naturally antiseptic and helps blood clot faster. They'd find a web, roll it into a ball, and press it directly into the wound. The bleeding would stop within minutes. Infections were the real killer, though. A small cut could turn deadly if bacteria got in. Cowboys used honey when they had it, which is naturally antibacterial, but more often they'd use pine pitch or sap from certain trees. This sticky substance sealed wounds and prevented infection better than many modern treatments. For burns from campfires or branding irons, they'd use the gel from inside cactus pads. Prickly pear cactus especially contained a cooling substance that soothed burns and promoted healing. They'd split the pad open and apply the inner gel directly to burned skin. Broken bones required serious skill. Cowboys would fashion splints from straight branches and secure them with strips of leather or cloth. The key was immobilizing the break completely while still allowing blood flow. Too tight and you'd lose the limb, too loose and the bone wouldn't heal straight. Here's something that sounds crazy but worked. For severe pain, they'd chew willow bark. Willow contains salicylic acid, which is basically natural aspirin. It wouldn't knock you out, but it took the edge off enough to keep moving. Snake bites were treated with a completely different approach than Hollywood shows. Cowboys didn't cut and suck the wound. That just spread venom faster. Instead, they'd immobilize the bitten limb, keep it below heart level, and get to help as quickly as possible. Simple, but it saved lives. For dislocated joints, experienced cowboys learned to pop them back into place. Shoulders were the most common. They'd use leverage and careful manipulation, often having another cowboy help pull in the right direction. Painful as hell, but necessary when you were days from a doctor. Speaking of staying alive, none of these medical tricks mattered if you died of thirst first. Finding water on the prairie was the difference between life and death. Water was everything in the West. Go without it for 3 days and you're buzzard food. But cowboys didn't need fancy divining rods or metal detectors. They used something way more reliable: nature's own water indicators. First, they watched the wildlife. Deer trails always led to water eventually. Bees never flew more than a few miles from their hive, and hives needed water nearby. Follow the bees at dawn or dusk, and you'd find a water source within an hour. Then there's the vegetation trick. Cottonwood trees, willows, and certain grasses only grew where underground water was accessible. Cowboys could spot these plants from miles away and know exactly where to dig. Sometimes water was just 3 feet down in spots that looked bone dry on the surface. Here's the genius part. They'd watch how morning dew formed on different plants. Heavy dew on certain vegetation meant underground water was close. They dig in low spots near these plants and hit water when everyone else was dying of thirst. But the most reliable method? Animal behavior at dusk. Horses, cattle, and wild animals all headed toward water as the day cooled. A cowboy could sit still for 30 minutes at sunset, watch which direction animals moved, and follow them straight to water. Ants were another indicator. Certain species built colonies near water sources. Follow an ant trail in the morning when they were most active, and you'd often find moisture within a quarter mile. Some old-timers claimed they could smell water from a distance. Sounds crazy, but moisture in the air carried a distinct scent, especially in desert regions where your nose adapted to extreme dryness. The human body is capable of amazing things when survival depends on it. Water alone wasn't enough. Finding water was only half the battle. You also needed food, and cowboys had tricks for that which didn't require wasting precious ammunition. Cowboys couldn't always rely on chuck wagon meals. Sometimes you were days from camp with nothing but your horse and your wits. Knowing how to find food meant the difference between making it back and becoming part of the landscape. Small game was everywhere, if you knew how to catch it. Rabbits, prairie dogs, and ground squirrels provided protein. Cowboys would set simple snares using wire or horsehair, placing them on animal trails. Check the snares morning and evening, and you'd usually have meat. But here's the trick most people miss. You didn't waste ammunition on small game. Bullets were expensive and needed for defense or large game. Instead, cowboys used throwing sticks, rocks, or snares. A well-thrown rock could take down a rabbit at 20 feet. Fish were abundant in prairie streams. Cowboys would fashion hooks from thorns, carved bone, or even bent nails from their boots. Using grasshoppers or grubs as bait, they'd catch enough fish to feed themselves for days. They'd also build simple fish traps from woven branches, funneling fish into enclosures they couldn't escape. Edible plants supplemented meat. Wild onions grew in moist areas and added flavor to bland trail food. Prairie turnips, which Native Americans called timsala, provided starchy nutrition similar to potatoes. Various berries, when in season, offered vitamins and natural sugar. Bird eggs were protein gold mines. Prairie chickens, quail, and other ground-nesting birds laid eggs that cowboys could collect without harming future populations. They'd take 1 or 2 eggs from a nest, never the whole clutch. Insects were emergency food that nobody wanted but everyone used when desperate. Grasshoppers roasted over fire tasted like nutty shrimp. Ant larvae provided protein and fat. Grubs from rotting logs were edible if you could stomach them. Survival wasn't about comfort, it was about calories. The really smart cowboys knew which animals were easiest to hunt. Pronghorn antelope were fast but curious. Wave a cloth on a stick, and they'd sometimes approach close enough for a shot. Armadillos were slow and easy to catch, providing decent meat despite their armor. But catching food was only part of the problem. Cowboys needed containers to carry water and cook food, but they couldn't always rely on having metal pots and canteens. When your canteen developed a leak, or you lost your cooking pot crossing a river, you didn't just give up. Cowboys learned to make containers from whatever nature provided. This knowledge separated survivors from casualties. The simplest water container was a cleaned animal stomach or bladder. After butchering game, cowboys would thoroughly rinse these organs, tie off one end, and suddenly have a watertight bag. Not pretty, but it held a gallon of water and could be sealed with a leather cord. Bark containers were more sophisticated. Birch bark especially could be peeled in large sheets, folded and sewn with plant fibers or sinew. These containers were surprisingly durable and completely waterproof. Cowboys would heat pine pitch to seal the seams, creating vessels that lasted for months. For cooking, they'd use hollowed-out sections of green wood. A thick piece of cottonwood or willow could be carved into a bowl shape. Fill it with water and drop in hot rocks from the fire. The rocks would boil the water without burning through the wood. This technique cooked stews and soups when metal pots weren't available. Gourds and hard squash shells made excellent containers when dried properly. Cowboys traveling through areas where these plants grew would collect them, clean them out, and let them dry in the sun. The result was a lightweight, durable container perfect for carrying water or storing dried food. Woven grass baskets could hold dry goods like jerky, dried berries, or ground meal. While they wouldn't hold water, they were easy to make and replace lost saddlebags. Cowboys would weave them during downtime, creating useful gear from materials that grew everywhere. Here's the clever part. They'd line woven baskets with animal fat or pine pitch, making them waterproof. This took a leaky basket and transformed it into a functional water carrier. The process required patience, but survival often did. Clay containers were the most permanent solution. Cowboys would find clay deposits near riverbanks, shape vessels by hand, and fire them in campfires. These weren't fancy pottery, but they held water and could be used for cooking directly over flames. Speaking of weather, knowing when storms were coming could save your life and all your hard-won supplies. Weather could kill you faster than anything else on the prairie. Tornadoes, lightning, flash floods, and blizzards appeared with terrifying speed. Cowboys who couldn't read the signs didn't last long out there. Cloud formations told the whole story. High, wispy cirrus clouds meant weather changes within 24 hours. Dark, towering cumulonimbus clouds meant to get to shelter immediately because hell was about to break loose. Cowboys learned to read the sky like a book written specifically for their survival. But cowboys watched more than just clouds. Animal behavior was incredibly reliable. Cattle bunching together and acting nervous meant a storm was coming within hours. Birds flying low indicated dropping air pressure. Even insects changed their behavior before weather shifted. Ants would seal their hills, and spiders would take down their webs. The air itself gave warnings. That metallic smell before a thunderstorm? That's ozone from lightning strikes. Cowboys learned to recognize it and find cover before the first bolt hit. Static electricity making their hair stand up meant lightning was about to strike nearby. Time to get off your horse and away from trees immediately. Temperature changes told stories too. A sudden, warm wind in winter, especially from the south, meant a blizzard was building. Cold air dropping rapidly in summer meant severe thunderstorms with possible tornadoes. Cowboys could feel these shifts hours before storms arrived, giving them time to prepare. Wind direction was critical. Winds shifting from south to west meant storms were approaching. Winds from the north brought cold weather. Experienced cowboys could predict temperature changes just by feeling which direction the wind blew. Here's the survival trick. When a storm hit, they'd position themselves in low ground but never in dry creek beds. Flash floods could appear from storms miles away, turning a safe spot into a death trap in minutes. They'd also avoid lone trees and high ground where lightning struck most often. The really smart ones watched the horizon constantly. On flat prairie, you could see weather systems developing from 50 miles away. That gave you maybe an hour to find shelter or prepare. Cowboys used every minute of that warning time to secure horses, protect supplies, and find the safest position possible. Speaking of preparation, preserving meat without refrigeration or even salt meant the difference between feast and famine on long cattle drives. When a cowboy shot a deer or butchered a steer, he suddenly had more meat than he could eat in a week. Without preservation, that protein would rot within days in the prairie heat. But cowboys had figured out multiple ways to keep meat edible for months. The most common method was sun drying. Cut meat into thin strips no thicker than a quarter inch. Hang them on racks made from branches, positioned in direct sunlight with good air circulation. The sun and wind would dry the meat in 2 to 3 days, creating jerky that lasted for months. But here's the trick. You didn't need salt if you did it right. The key was cutting the meat thin enough and drying it completely. Any moisture left inside would cause spoilage. Cowboys would test jerky by bending it. If it cracked instead of bending, it was dry enough to store. Smoking meat worked even better in humid conditions where sun drying was unreliable. Build a small fire with green wood that produced lots of smoke but little flame. Hang meat strips above the smoke, not close enough to cook, just enough to dry and flavor. The smoke also kept flies away, which was crucial for preventing maggots. Certain woods worked better than others. Hickory, mesquite, and oak produced the best flavor and had natural antibacterial properties. Pine and other resinous woods made meat taste terrible and were avoided unless you were desperate. For longer-term storage, cowboys would combine methods. First smoke the meat, then finish drying it in the sun. This double process created incredibly durable jerky that could survive in saddlebags through rain, heat, and rough handling. Pemmican was the ultimate survival food. Cowboys learned this from Native Americans: pound dried meat into powder, mix it with rendered fat and dried berries, then pack it into containers. This mixture provided complete nutrition and lasted for years without spoiling. 1 pound of pemmican could sustain a man for an entire day. The fat was critical. It sealed out air and moisture while adding calories. Cowboys would render fat from any animal they butchered, saving every drop for preservation purposes. Waste nothing was the rule when survival was on the line. And when metal tools broke or were lost, cowboys also crafted essential tools from stones instead. When your knife broke or you lost your axe crossing a river, you couldn't just order a replacement from Amazon. Cowboys had to make tools from whatever they could find, and stone was everywhere on the prairie. Flint knapping wasn't just ancient history. Cowboys used these techniques regularly. Flint, chert, and obsidian could be shaped into razor-sharp cutting tools by striking them with harder stones. The technique required practice, but a skilled cowboy could create a functional knife blade in under an hour. The process was simple, but demanded precision. Find a suitable stone with fine grain and no cracks. Use a harder stone as a hammer to strike flakes off the edge. Each strike removed a thin piece, gradually shaping a sharp edge. The resulting blade could skin game, cut rope, and perform most tasks a metal knife could handle. For heavier work, cowboys would make stone axes. Find a hard, dense stone roughly the size of your fist. Use another stone to peck and grind a groove around the middle. Lash this grooved stone to a wooden handle with wet rawhide. As the rawhide dried, it shrank and tightened, creating a secure connection. These axes could chop wood and process game surprisingly well. Scrapers for cleaning hides were even simpler. A flat piece of flint with one sharp edge worked perfectly for removing flesh and fat from animal skins. Cowboys would carry these stone scrapers as backups even when they had metal tools because stone never rusted or broke. Grinding stones were essential for processing plant foods. 2 flat rocks, one stationary and one moved by hand, could grind seeds, nuts, and dried meat into powder. This made tough foods digestible and created flour for basic bread. Arrowheads and spear points extended hunting range without using precious ammunition. A well-made stone point on a straight shaft could take down deer-sized game. Cowboys would make several at once, keeping spares in case of breakage. The really clever application was using stone flakes as surgical tools. Obsidian could be knapped to create edges sharper than modern scalpel blades. Cowboys used these for removing splinters, lancing infections, and even emergency surgery when necessary. But without fire, every other survival skill quickly fell apart, so being able to start a fire in any weather condition was absolutely critical for staying alive. Getting a fire going in driving rain or howling wind separated the living from the dead. Cowboys couldn't just pull out waterproof matches or a lighter. They had to understand fire at a fundamental level and carry the right materials. The key was preparation. Smart cowboys always kept a possibles bag with fire-starting materials protected from moisture. This included char cloth, which was just cotton fabric burned in a low-oxygen environment until it turned black and caught sparks easily. They'd strike steel against flint, directing sparks onto the char cloth. One good spark, and the cloth would glow red like a tiny ember. Then they'd transfer that ember to a bundle of the finest, driest tinder they could find, usually shredded bark, dried grass, or even bird nests. Here's the trick most people miss. Cowboys built their tinder bundles in layers, starting with material as fine as hair and gradually increasing to pencil-thick twigs. They'd blow gently on the ember, adding oxygen without extinguishing it. The tinder would smoke, then suddenly burst into flame. But what if everything was wet? Cowboys knew which trees had resinous wood that burned even when damp. Pine knots, the dense sections where branches met trunks, contained so much pitch they'd ignite in a downpour. Birch bark worked the same way, peeling off in waterproof sheets that burned hot and fast. They'd also carry a small piece of fat wood, which was pine wood, so saturated with resin it was practically flammable oil in solid form. A few shavings of fat wood could start a fire in conditions that seemed impossible. This material was so valuable that cowboys would search for it specifically and guard it carefully. The bow drill method worked without any modern materials. A wooden spindle rotated rapidly against a wooden base created friction heat. Add pressure and speed, and you generate enough heat to create an ember in the wood dust. Transfer that ember to tinder, and you had fire. This technique required practice and the right wood types, but it worked reliably. The really desperate trick? Gunpowder from a cartridge mixed with a tiny bit of grease made an emergency fire starter that worked in any weather. Dangerous but effective when your life depended on warmth. Cowboys would carefully open a cartridge, mix the powder with fat, and use a spark to ignite it. Speaking of materials, cowboys also needed rope for everything from securing loads to catching horses, but they couldn't always buy it from a store. Rope was essential for cowboy life. You needed it to tie down gear, secure horses, build shelters, and 1,000 other tasks. But when your rope broke or you ran out, you couldn't just quit. Cowboys learned to make cordage from plants that grew wild across the prairie. Yucca plants were rope factories growing wild. The long, fibrous leaves could be pounded with rocks to separate the fibers from the pulp. These fibers were incredibly strong and could be twisted into rope that rivaled anything made from hemp or cotton. The process was simple but time-consuming. Harvest yucca leaves, pound them until the fibers separated, then let them dry. Once dry, take several fibers and twist them together in one direction. Take 2 of these twisted bundles and twist them together in the opposite direction. This counter-twisting created rope that wouldn't unravel. Dogbane and milkweed plants had similar fibrous stalks that made excellent cordage. Cowboys would harvest these plants in late summer when the fibers were strongest. The stems could be split and the inner fibers extracted, creating material that was surprisingly strong for its thickness. Willow bark could be stripped in long sections and twisted into quick rope for temporary uses. It wasn't as strong as yucca or dogbane, but it worked for light-duty applications and could be made in minutes rather than hours. For the strongest rope, cowboys would braid multiple strands together. 3-strand braids were common, but some would create 4 or even 6-strand braids for critical applications like lariats. The more strands, the stronger and more durable the rope. Animal materials worked too. Rawhide strips cut in spirals from a single hide created incredibly long, strong rope. Sinew from along an animal's spine could be dried and twisted into thin but extremely strong cordage perfect for sewing or binding. Hair from horsetails and manes could be braided into rope that was both strong and flexible. Cowboys would collect shed hair over time, then braid it during downtime. These hair ropes were prized for their durability and were often used for bridles and reins. The really clever cowboys would treat their plant fiber ropes with animal fat or beeswax. This waterproofing made the rope last much longer and prevented rot. A well-made and treated yucca rope could last for years with proper care. But plants weren't just useful for rope, they could also keep you alive. And knowing which ones you could eat in an emergency could save your life when hunting failed and supplies ran out. Sometimes hunting failed, sometimes you lost your supplies, sometimes you just got separated from your group with nothing but the clothes on your back. In these desperate situations, knowing emergency plant foods meant the difference between survival and starvation. Cattails were the prairie supermarket. Every part was edible at different times of year. In spring, the young shoots tasted like cucumbers and could be eaten raw. The pollen could be collected and used like flour. The roots could be processed into starch. One cattail marsh could feed a person for weeks. Prickly pear cactus provided both food and water. The pads could be carefully despined, then roasted or eaten raw. They tasted slightly sour but provided moisture and nutrition. The fruits, called tunas, were sweet and packed with vitamins. Cowboys would eat these whenever they found them. Acorns from oak trees were abundant and highly nutritious, but they required processing. Raw acorns contained bitter tannins that could make you sick. Cowboys would shell them, crush them, then soak the meal in running water for several hours. This leached out the tannins, leaving nutritious flour that could be cooked into mush or cakes. Wild onions and garlic grew in moist areas and were easy to identify by their distinctive smell. These provided flavor and nutrition, plus they had natural antibiotic properties. Cowboys would eat them raw or add them to whatever else they were cooking. Dandelions, which most people consider weeds, were completely edible. Young leaves made salads, roots could be roasted and ground into a coffee substitute. Even the flowers could be eaten. These plants grew everywhere and provided reliable emergency food. Pine nuts from pinyon pines were calorie-dense and delicious. Cowboys would collect them in fall when the cones opened. A handful of pine nuts provided significant energy and could be eaten raw or roasted. Mesquite beans were another staple. These could be ground into sweet flour that made nutritious cakes. Native Americans had used mesquite for thousands of years, and cowboys learned the technique from them. The beans were available in late summer and could be stored for months. But here's the critical knowledge. Cowboys also knew which plants would kill you. Hemlock looked similar to wild carrot, but caused paralysis and death. Jimson weed caused hallucinations and could be fatal. Knowing what not to eat was just as important as knowing what was safe. Speaking of staying safe, surviving cold nights without blankets or sleeping bags required techniques that use the earth itself as a heating system. When temperatures dropped below freezing and you had no blankets, cowboys didn't just curl up and hope for the best. They used techniques that turned frozen prairie into survivable sleeping conditions. This wasn't comfortable, but it kept them alive. The ground bed technique was brilliantly simple. Dig a trench about a foot deep and 3 feet long. Build a fire in it and let it burn for a couple hours until the ground was thoroughly heated. Then scrape out the coals and ashes, cover the hot earth with a thin layer of dirt, and sleep on top. That heated ground would radiate warmth for hours, turning frozen prairie into a surprisingly decent bed. Cowboys called this a ground bed, and it saved countless lives during unexpected cold snaps. The key was judging the heat carefully. Too hot and you'd wake up with burns. Not hot enough and you'd freeze by midnight. They'd also position themselves near large rocks that had absorbed sun heat during the day. These natural heat batteries released warmth slowly through the night. Combine a heated ground bed with a sun-warmed boulder at your back, and you could survive nights that killed unprepared travelers. Insulation was the other critical factor. Dried grass, leaves, and even tumbleweeds made excellent insulation when stuffed inside clothing or piled around a sleeping area. Cowboys would literally bury themselves in plant material, creating a natural sleeping bag that trapped body heat. The really smart ones traveled with a piece of canvas or oilcloth, not for shelter, but to lay over their ground bed. This trapped the rising heat and created a microclimate that could be 20 degrees warmer than the surrounding air. Body position mattered too. Curling into a tight ball minimized heat loss. Keeping your head covered was critical, since you lose most body heat through your head. Cowboys would wrap their heads in spare clothing or even their saddle blanket. Group sleeping was the ultimate cold weather survival technique. 2 or 3 cowboys sleeping close together shared body heat and dramatically increased everyone's chances of survival. Pride didn't matter when freezing to death was the alternative. Fire management through the night was an art form. A large fire burned hot but died quickly. Cowboys would build a long fire parallel to where they slept, using logs that burned slowly. This provided steady heat for hours without constant tending. If you were lost or hurt, being able to signal for rescue when you were lost or injured could mean the difference between being found and dying alone on the prairie. Getting separated from your group or injured in remote areas was a death sentence unless someone could find you. Cowboys developed signaling methods that worked over vast distances without any modern equipment. Smoke signals were the most effective daytime method. 3 fires in a triangle pattern was the universal distress signal. The smoke could be seen for miles across flat prairie. Cowboys would add green branches or damp grass to create thick white smoke that stood out against the sky. The key was making the smoke as dark or as white as possible for maximum contrast. Dry grass created light smoke. Green vegetation created thick white smoke. Adding rubber, leather, or oil-soaked materials created black smoke. Cowboys would alternate between white and black smoke to create a pattern that clearly indicated human activity rather than natural fires. At night, fire signals worked differently. 3 fires in a line or triangle could be seen from incredible distances in the darkness. Cowboys would keep these fires burning and occasionally throw on pitch-rich wood to create bright flares that attracted attention. Reflective signals used any shiny surface to flash sunlight. A piece of broken mirror, polished metal, or even a belt buckle could send flashes visible for miles. Cowboys would aim these flashes at the horizon, sweeping back and forth to maximize the chance of being seen. The technique was simple. Hold the reflective surface near your face, extend your other hand toward the target, and adjust the angle until you see the reflection on your extended hand. Then move your hand slightly and the flash would shoot toward your target. Ground signals worked for aerial searchers, though this was more relevant in later years. Cowboys would arrange rocks, logs, or disturbed earth into large X patterns or SOS letters. These needed to be huge, at least 10 feet across, to be visible from any distance. Sound signals carried surprisingly far in open country. 3 gunshots in quick succession was the universal distress call. Cowboys would fire 3 shots, wait a minute, then repeat. This pattern distinguished distress from hunting or other normal shooting. Whistles carried farther than shouting and required less energy. Cowboys would use their fingers or carved wooden whistles to create loud, piercing sounds. 3 short blasts, repeated regularly, signaled distress. Marker trails helped rescuers follow your path. Cowboys would break branches at eye level, stack rocks in unusual patterns, or scratch arrows in dirt. These signs told searchers which direction you traveled and helped them track you down. The most important rule? Stay in one place once you'd signaled. Moving around made you harder to find. Cowboys would signal, then wait at that location, continuing to signal periodically until help arrived. Once you'd found water, finding it was one thing, but collecting and carrying it without containers required additional clever techniques. You found water using animal trails and vegetation signs, but what if you lost your canteen? Cowboys had backup methods for collecting and transporting water that didn't require any manufactured containers. The simplest method was using large leaves as temporary water carriers. Certain plants like burdock had leaves big enough to hold a pint of water when cupped properly. Cowboys would drink directly from these natural cups or use them to transport water short distances. Hollow reeds and plant stems worked as drinking straws for accessing water in narrow crevices or shallow pools where you couldn't get your face close enough. Cut a reed, clear out the pith, and you had a functional straw that let you drink from otherwise inaccessible sources. Dew collection provided water when no streams were available. Cowboys would drag a cloth or their shirt through grass heavy with morning dew, then wring it out into their mouth or a container. In good conditions, you could collect a pint of water in an hour using this method. Transpiration bags were genius. Tie a clear piece of cloth or even a clean shirt around a leafy branch, making sure it's sealed at the bottom. As the plant transpires, moisture collects inside the cloth. By afternoon, you'd have drinkable water. This worked best with non-poisonous plants in sunny conditions. Rock depressions often held rainwater. Cowboys would seek out natural basins and rocks where water collected and stayed relatively clean. These natural cisterns could hold gallons of water for days after a rain. Digging for water in dry creek beds often worked. Even when the surface was bone dry, water often flowed underground. Dig in the outside bend of a dry creek, usually the lowest point, and water would often seep into the hole within an hour. Solar stills were advanced but effective. Dig a hole, place a container in the center, cover the hole with a cloth or piece of bark, and place a small rock in the center to create a low point above the container. Moisture from the soil would evaporate, condense on the cover, and drip into the container. This produced small amounts of water but worked even in very dry conditions. But even if you found water, that didn't mean you were safe, because without shelter, the land itself could kill you faster than thirst. Exposure killed more cowboys than anything else. Wind, rain, snow, and sun could all be deadly without proper shelter. But cowboys learned to build protection using nothing but natural materials and their bare hands. The debris hut was the quickest emergency shelter. Find a long ridgepole, prop one end on a tree or rock about waist high, lean branches against both sides of the ridgepole, creating a frame. Then pile leaves, grass, and any other plant material over the frame until you had a thick layer at least 2 feet deep. This insulation trapped air and kept you dry and warm. The entrance was kept small to retain heat. Cowboys could build a basic debris hut in under an hour, and it provided surprisingly good protection from wind and rain. Lean-to shelters worked when you had a little more time. Find 2 trees about 6 feet apart. Lash a horizontal pole between them at shoulder height. Lean branches from the pole to the ground at a 45-degree angle. Cover these with bark, grass, or leafy branches. Build a fire in front of the opening. and the lean-to reflected heat back at you while blocking wind. Rock overhangs and caves provided instant shelter but required caution. Cowboys would check carefully for current animal residents before moving in. They'd also avoid areas with loose rocks overhead or signs of flooding. Dugout shelters worked in areas with soft soil. Dig into a hillside or bank, creating a cave-like space. Use the excavated dirt to build walls around the entrance, cover the top with branches and more dirt. These shelters were incredibly warm in winter and cool in summer. Grass huts use bundled grass lashed to a frame. Cowboys would gather armfuls of tall prairie grass, tie them into bundles, and attach these to a dome-shaped frame made from bent branches. The overlapping grass bundles shed water like shingles and provided good insulation. Snow shelters saved lives in blizzards. Dig into a snowdrift, creating a small cave with the entrance lower than the sleeping area. Body heat would warm the interior while the snow blocked wind. Cowboys would poke a small ventilation hole to prevent carbon dioxide buildup. Windbreaks were the minimum shelter. Stack rocks, logs, or even pile up dirt to create a barrier against prevailing winds. Combined with a fire on the protected side, this simple structure made survival possible in conditions that would otherwise be deadly. The key to all these shelters was understanding that insulation and wind protection mattered more than fancy construction. A crude shelter built quickly was better than a perfect shelter you froze to death trying to complete. Speaking of finding your way, the final critical survival skill was navigating across hundreds of miles of featureless prairie without any instruments. Getting lost on the prairie meant death. Everything looked the same for hundreds of miles, but cowboys had multiple navigation methods that worked day or night in any weather, using nothing but observation and knowledge. The sun was the obvious starting point. It rose in the east and set in the west, but experienced cowboys knew it wasn't that simple. The sun's path changed with seasons. In summer, it rose northeast and set northwest. In winter, southeast and southwest. They adjusted their navigation accordingly. At night, the North Star became their GPS. Find the Big Dipper, follow the two stars at the end of the cup upward about 5 times that distance, and you'd hit Polaris. That star never moved, always pointing true north. Cowboys could navigate accurately, even on the darkest nights. But here's where it gets interesting. They also used the moon. A full moon rose in the east at sunset and set in the west at sunrise. A first quarter moon at sunset pointed south. These patterns repeated reliably, giving cowboys multiple navigation tools. During the day, they'd use the shadow stick method, plant a stick in the ground, and mark where the shadow tip falls. Wait 15 minutes, mark the new shadow position. The line between those marks ran east-west. Simple geometry that worked anywhere. Wind patterns were reliable too. Prevailing winds in most of the west came from the southwest. Trees and bushes grew bent away from constant wind. Cowboys could determine direction just by looking at vegetation even on cloudy days when the sun wasn't visible. They'd also memorize landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a lone tree, a particular hill. These mental maps covered hundreds of miles. Cowboys would note landmarks constantly, building a mental picture of the terrain that let them backtrack or navigate to specific locations. Animal trails often led to water or between feeding and bedding areas. Following these trails could lead you to resources or help you maintain direction when other methods failed. Deer especially traveled in relatively straight lines between areas. Stream and river flow provided directional information. Most rivers in the West flowed generally eastward toward the Mississippi or westward toward the Pacific. Knowing which watershed you were in told you which direction water flowed and helped orient your travel. The really experienced cowboys could navigate by feel. They'd notice subtle slopes in terrain, remember which direction water drained, and use these clues to maintain their bearing even in complete darkness or fog. So there you have it. 15 survival skills that kept cowboys alive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. No fancy gear, no modern technology, just knowledge passed down and hard-won through experience. Makes you wonder what we've lost in our rush toward convenience, doesn't it? These weren't just survival tricks. They were a complete way of understanding and working with nature instead of against it. Maybe it's time we remembered some of these lessons before they're completely forgotten.